Hi there, and welcome to the latest episode of Mrs. Mummypenny Talks with Ridley Wrights. And we are now on to episode 3. This is very exciting. An interesting stat about podcasts. Very, very few podcasts make it past 6 episodes. So we're halfway there.
Halfway there. Okay, that is an interesting fact. I didn't know that.
Yeah, most people just give it up because they just, I don't know, can't cope with the editing or coming up with the ideas or all that kind of stuff. Editing.
That won't be us. That won't be us. Although,
No.
I just have to thank you for taking on the whole of the editing of this. It's greatly appreciated.
Well, what we like to do is just record these podcasts in one flow, so I don't have to do any editing because I hate editing. Absolutely hate it with a passion. I had to do some editing of episode 2 because we had a funny little robot moment in the middle of it, which I had to edit out, and I was cursing you whilst I was editing it on Tuesday when I put the podcast out. So we're on to episode 3, and thank you so much for everybody who's listened to our first couple of episodes. We've had really great stats, downloads and views on YouTube. Less views on YouTube than listeners to the podcast, but I think that's to be expected. But if you watch on YouTube, you get to see us with our gorgeous lipsticks. Where
Heather Shimmer, straight from the 90s, brought to you in 2021. Thank you, Amazon.
As discussed in episode 1, Beck has actually ordered it from Amazon and is wearing it, and I've bucked the trend and I've gone bright red today to match the bright red top. How have you been for the past week?
Good. YouTube viewers will notice that the backdrop is different because my usual office is currently being redecorated. We thought it was a sort of a sunset orange. We've just cracked open the paint can and it looks neon. So we could be going back to the 80s in that room when we next get in there. A bit chaotic, got the builders in, but it's progressing slowly but surely. How about you?
So I've been trying to be quite restful this past week because I had my operation last Friday. Sort of thought, I'm completely fine, completely recovered from it the next day. And no, it takes a few days to get over a general anaesthetic. I've been trying to take it easy, but I have had a few deadlines this week, which I've hit. So that's good. Yeah. And I've got the boys this weekend. So looking forward to having them for 5 days. I have my boys 50% of the time after divorce.
And it's sunshiny and warm. It actually finally really does feel like spring is here and we can start to dress in lovely floaty floral things again.
Yeah. And have a better work-life balance, which is the topic of today's podcast. So what are we going to be covering over the next 20-30 minutes or so?
Well, I think it's work-life balance, but this is specifically looking at mothers in particular and motherhood. And when we first talked about this, we were thinking about motherhood and work because that is a real challenge and a real juggle, and we will talk about that. But also, as we were thinking about the episode, we broadened it and talked about motherhood and life because actually there's more to being a human being who also happens to be a mother than just being a mother and going to work. There are other needs and requirements that often kind of fall by the wayside. And so, I think we really want to chat about that. And the stats on the surface look quite positive. If you were to look it up online, over 77% of women do return to work after they've had children, and 84% of them go back to the same employer. So that all sounds really positive, but actually there's a lot of stuff hidden behind that. So a few more stats to throw at you. So 17% of women leave employment completely in the 5 years following childbirth. Versus 4% of men. I mean, the difference there is to be expected, I think. And fewer than 1 in 5 of all new mothers return to full-time work. after they've had children. So and if you leave work completely, you're 3 times more likely to return to a lower responsibility job. And when you return even to the same employer, whilst you'll probably go back in at the same level, your chances of progress are significantly reduced. So I mean, I'm just putting all those facts in because I think kind of part of the issue is that the workplace still hasn't really figured out how to make best use of mothers as they come back into work with some sort of differing needs and values around their life, but no less useful, relevant, critical to the working environment.
Yeah. I reflecting back on my sort of personal experience so I was in full-time employment when I had each of my children, and so I had my first child when I was 30, so 30, 32 and 35, and quite a lot of those comments you've just said ring really true, because so in my 20s when I didn't have children, my career sort of took quite a upward trend, earning more money quite quickly, being promoted, blah 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 blah. But then throughout my 30s, my responsibility levels didn't really change, and therefore my salary didn't really change too much, because I was constantly like maternity leave, going back to work, working for a bit, then another maternity leave. So there's a huge, I think it really feels like my career certainly, and a lot of other people that I know as well, their career sort of stalled throughout that time where you've got little children. And that's maybe personal choice of the individual as well, but what I didn't actually no, I did try to go back less than full-time. Bit of a different situation where I had to earn as much money as possible in my household, so I had to go back full-time. I did try going back to 4 days a week with after my second child, but I was doing exactly the same job and getting paid like 20% less, so I just couldn't stand it. And I know there's so many women out there who if they're in that 4 day a week position, say that's probably the worst part-time job, doing a 4 day a week type of job. I've never done a 3 day a week. I've never tried a job share. I've got a few friends actually who have made job shares work, but they're very rare, because with a job share you almost have to have like the same, I don't know, values and beliefs and ways of working, haven't you? And it's really difficult to find an identical person like you.
Yes. Again, I've also never had a job share, but I do think it's probably quite a challenging sort of setup. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was working full time when I had Amy, and then I went back to work part-time. I have had a slightly complicated working life setup since having the children, and a little bit before, because I've been doing my freelance work and setting up Ridley Wrights alongside working for an employer. So on paper, I went back with Amy. I went back and I worked something like I think it was 22 hours over 3 days. And then I was also doing a solid day or 2 days of work on Ridley Wrights as well. So I was kind of actually working full time. So that was a bit of a challenge. Never felt like I was doing enough of anything for anybody, really. You leave the office feeling like you haven't finished. You've barely landed, started the week, and then you're off again. And then the business was it's just very slow to try and build a business on not very much time. And you've got to spend all your time working with the clients you currently have, rightly so. But that sense of how do you then jump to the next level is really quite challenging. And then also kind of the inevitable one of thinking, oh my goodness, did I have a child in order to put her in childcare for so many hours? And I know that's a completely personal choice, and I hugely support any woman that decides on any amount of hours of childcare. I think that, you know, that should be without judgment. But yeah, that values thing really kind of sprung up and became a question that I needed to answer.
Yeah, but that leads us on to the almost like, how do you dissect your life? So you have these small individuals that have come into your life, and everybody's got a different viewpoint as to how much of your life you should give to them. I think but the overarching view is that you're a mum and you should give your all to your children, and but there are other parts of life. There's your time you need to give to your wider family, to your friends, to your business, to yourself, self-care, nice things. And I just think there's still a huge expectation on mums that their sole focus should be their children. I mean, career probably comes second, but certainly things like self-care and looking after yourself, it's like always bottom of the pile. I've had so many discussions with women who are just like, yeah, never have any time for myself, particularly over the last year. I mean, that's a whole different situation to talk about, but it what's the right word to use? I was going to say it aggravates me. It upsets me that women don't prioritize themselves enough, because yeah, we have children, but it's we don't have to give our entire all to our children. And actually, looking after yourself and your own mental health and your own physical health is only going to benefit the children in the long run, because they see mum out there looking after herself.
Well, I think you raised, gosh, so many great points there. One thing I would say is that I've always, certainly since I had children, I've always known that you're the advocate that I can go to, who will say, put your oxygen mask on first. That's the most important thing. And you've kind of said that to me from kind of day one of becoming a mum. So, so I think that's there. I think the point about what's happened in the last year is really interesting, and I think that's why it's really important to have this conversation now, because as everything's opening up, and we're going, kids are back at school and we're going back out into the workplace, and we've had this enormous kind of life-changing, world-changing experience of the pandemic. This is a really good moment for us all to kind of say, right, okay, how are we going to do this? Can we do this differently? And it's a moment that we've got to grab with both hands now, I think, because once it passes, we'll be rooted back into whatever we define at this moment. So yes, and that issue of those decisions you make about how much time you spend with your children, I think as women we're in a really interesting position, because all sorts of different things have changed since sort of the 70s, I would say, which is that we now live in a 2-income household economy. It's very, very difficult to afford life, particularly life with children, if there's only one person earning. We've also, I think, since the 70s and increasingly so, live in the cult of the child, where everything is about kind of giving, what's the whole thing about 18 summers of memories, and those sort of, there's a real pressure of what you're doing is you're creating memories for your children. You're not just bringing them up and keeping them safe and keeping them fed. You're creating this bank of memories that they're taking with them into the future. And then there are all these mixed messages, because we are supposed to want to work and we are supposed to want to, follow our own purpose and feel fulfilled, but also everything at home has to be done really well. And also little Jimmy needs to have all these beautiful memories created for him. And I think it's all of those different pressures that really kind of collide around this subject. And I think it's a really tricky one to to find out what that balance is and to get it right. And I suspect as well, something I don't know yet, but I suspect it changes. You know, being a mum isn't a static activity, right? You know, being a mum with a 3-month-old is a very different set of circumstances to being a mum with a 3-year-old or a 13-year-old, etc. So
yeah, I think you are, we've had this discussion many a time before, but you are at the most difficult point of life with a sort of 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and also quite demanding children of time and focus and play, and it's you do get a respite when they go to school. You really do. You can then almost switch it back onto you a little bit. But and then it's really strange when you get into, so my eldest is a teenager, and like I hardly see him because they go into the mode of just wanting to be in their bedroom all the time, and then you start to think, so has my child like completely gone? So it's almost like make the most of that time when they're younger, and you know, do all those farm trips and all those, making those memories, all those holidays, and because you sort of need to make the most of it before it goes. I don't know, it's a really difficult one. But I have to say that throughout my motherhood role, I have prioritized myself in self-care and looking after myself, and you know, getting out for walks and runs. But the huge change of my life getting divorced has immeasurably changed the amount of time I have for myself, because suddenly I have like half the week to myself, and what that, it's almost like it's the best bit about getting divorced, if you have a divorce where you split your time equally, is I've got half the week totally to myself, can do whatever I want, no responsibilities in effect, and then the other half of the week you really do try to give even extra to your children, because that's only like half the time you have them. So that's allowed, I can't tell you how much that's changed my life and really enabled me to, you know, focus on work in those days where I don't have them. It was a complete nightmare during lockdown, where I was trying to fit, I suppose I still had half the time. No, it wasn't really it was just difficult on the days where I was trying to teach them at home. That's what was the nightmare bit.
Homeschooling. I mean, obviously I didn't have to do it because
you got away with that.
Well, and I mean, even more so after the first lockdown came off, preschool childcare remained open. So I mean, apart from we had a couple of weeks where there was a case of coronavirus at the preschool, so the preschool had to shut down for a fortnight. But apart from that, I've been really lucky in terms of and I also, what it's really highlighted for me, and I think this is true, I think this could be where we might see a cultural shift, is that I think what it's highlighted probably for almost everybody is how important it is for our children that they are somewhere else with other people, not just for us and our ability to get on with stuff, but like, oh my goodness, how much they've missed playing with other people. And even though, as I say, preschool and childcare has been open for me, just this last week we had a friend over to play in the garden earlier in the week, and at the weekend we went over to somebody else's garden to play in their garden. You've never seen my kids so excited. Like, and it's, what is it? I mean, it's just playing with a kid in a garden, but the novelty factor is huge still at the moment, and I think it just really reinforces, and it's so lovely to see them doing their own playing, where you're not actively involved and you're not having to be Princess Elsa or Sky from Paw Patrol or anything else. Like, you're not having to go with those make-believes. Honestly, my God, make-believe stuff, it's not my favorite game. But yeah,
you do it though. Like I don't like that kind of stuff, and I didn't do it. And maybe
probably did it more than you remember.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're older, it's more of a distant memory.
But I think, you know, I don't know if we've touched on this before. I mean, I know you and I have in conversation, but there's that phrase, isn't there? It takes a village to raise a child, and I believe so strongly in that. Not just in terms of the support of the mother or the support of the parents, but also in terms of children need different things, and they need more than one or two adults in their lives. They need a variety of people and a variety of ages. And I do think, again, talking back to my theory that everything changed after the introduction of liberal economics in the 70s. But you know, this nuclear family and this ideal of 2.4 children living in our little houses, doing everything ourselves in a sort of anti-communal way, isn't brilliant. I don't think it. You know, I think it has a lot of negative impacts, including that sense of having a motherhood life balance.
Yeah. So what tips would you have for people to create a better work-life balance? Not just work life, a better life balance.
Yeah. I mean, what's really helped me is thinking about it in terms of role modeling, and I need to think about it much more clearly in terms of my son, but for me it's always been thinking about the role model I'm presenting to Amy. And I think it's also really interesting when we think, and there's another conversation maybe we've got time to touch on, about the motherless mother element of things when it comes to what role model, what blueprint you're following yourself. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. But my mum went out to work. I have a really vivid memory when I was at primary school of us having to talk about what occupations our parents had. And I came home and told my mum that somebody else's mother was a housewife, and that I had very proudly told everyone that my mother was a legal secretary. And she said, and I hope you said and a housewife. And she was very adamant about the fact that she was doing both of these things, and she took a great deal of pride in that. I.e., what I'm about to say is she took a great deal of pride in being a bloody superwoman and doing everything. How is it that I operate as a mother? Oh, I take a stupid amount of pride in being superwoman and doing everything. So, you know, I think it's one of the things that's really interesting, and one of the things that it's important to do as a new mum, or at any point of motherhood, is to really analyze, like, where are you getting what's your unconscious bias effectively around your own parenting style, and not necessarily to change that or to damn it, but I think, you know, to really understand and say, well, okay, either that is who I want to be as a parent and I'm going to go with it, or no, actually it's not where I want to be, and define what that role needs to look like. So I mean, that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing for me that is around this role modeling is the work I've done with Ridley Wrights, and I'm putting that more front and center, has been about showing my daughter that it's important to spend time following your dream, following your purpose, also with my own writing. So it can be really painful, particularly on a weekend when she sees me disappear upstairs to go writing. Well, and also Abraham now complains. They both sort of wail about the fact that mummy's taking time to do that. But for me, I feel okay about it because I know that I'm showing them, yeah, okay, I love you. And also there are things I need to do in the world. I have a purpose in the world beyond being your mum. And then similarly, more recently, I've introduced reading hour between 6 and 7. And most people will be like, oh yeah, I read with my kids. No, it's not about me reading with my children. I will read with them if they bring me a book during that time. But it's an hour where mummy and daddy sit down and read, because one of the things I also realised is that they were growing up in a household surrounded by books, seeing stacks of books around, but never actually seeing me in the act of reading.
Wow, yeah.
And that's been transformative on all sorts of levels. We have this lovely quiet hour before we go, and it's generally quiet there is some chaos in there sometimes. They're 2 and 4. What do you expect? But we have this lovely hour where I get to read, and I put no expectation on that. If I read the same goddamn sentence for the whole hour, that's okay. I'm not worrying. But what I found is I can cover chapters in that time, and they can do whatever they like. It's non-screen time. But they can, build things, draw pictures, play with whatever toys they like. And as I say, if they do bring me a book, I will stop reading and read to them. But then when they go off, I pick my own book up again. So those are, for what they're worth, those are my little ways of doing it. And the way that I allow myself to put my oxygen mask on is by thinking I am helping them to understand what being an adult and what being a mother looks like. And it means also doing your own thing.
Yeah, no, I think you've totally nailed the role modeling thing, because one thing I love about some of the discussions I have, particularly with my youngest comes out with these questions, but it normally stuff that comes from my eldest is normally when we're out on walks, is they're so proud of like what I've achieved and building this business from absolutely nothing into so Mrs. Mummypenny was a brand new almost industry that nobody else was doing. They just think it's amazing that I've built this really successful business, that pays for our house and on holidays one day, and our lives. And they just we talk about what other mums do, and they're like, yeah, and we talk about our mum who runs her own business and helps people to save money, and it's just it's amazing. And and this is to boys. I think that message is even more important to show to a girl. And I do a little bit of work, like volunteering work outside of, it's still linked to Mrs. Mummypenny, but I'm a STEM ambassador. So science, technology, engineering, maths. And I did a big presentation last year to loads of different schools. And it was a mixture of boys and girls, but I was put there predominantly as a female who studied maths, and talking through my career and how I've ended up in a career that the teenagers were actually really interested in. And the questions at the end. So tell us exactly, how do you make money out of your business? I just want to inspire my children and other children that, you can do whatever you want with life. And
I mean, and then also I'm going to be completely honest and throw in, those are all the great things I do. The shockingly awful things I do 90% of the housework. I probably struggle to fit in, as much of the other stuff that I would like to do in reality. And I do worry, and it's a conversation that Dave and I have about, the kids need to see him with a Hoover in his hand.
Yeah.
They need to see him putting washing in the washing machine. They need to see him cooking dinners and things. And it's an ongoing conversation. I won't even remotely suggest that it's one that's resolved yet. And I think one of the things that I didn't realise and I didn't properly think about before we had children, I don't think it would have stopped me, but it would have been useful to have had some of these conversations, is really thinking about that idea of what's the parenting style that I'm bringing to this relationship, both like what was I brought up with and what do I want, and what's the parenting style that Dave's bringing to this relationship, because actually there are a lot of similarities, which is great, although actually it's not, because a lot of the similarities are the things that you probably want to iron out, which is mum doing everything, and dad being there for fun outings and stuff. And I think really kind of challenging that is something that a very wise woman once said to me: how you start in those first few weeks and months is where you'll land forever, so get that right. I didn't. So, but anyway, that's fine. But I think it is really important to do that thinking beforehand.
Yeah. I don't think when you were talking about like what you saw from your mum and dad growing up, I'm trying to think back to what I saw from my mum and dad, and it's I suppose the overarching thing I've got from, so my mum was she was a housewife, but she did go out and like do cleaning jobs and stuff, particularly when I was a lot younger. And my dad was the one who went out to work, and he did shift work. So actually, we didn't tend to see too much of him. Or I always remember being told, "You've got to be quiet because Daddy's asleep upstairs." But we would always have our like weekend walks, like, or weekend beach visits. Did Dad ever go to the beach? I don't really remember my dad being at the beach with us, but he certainly came on these like long country walks down to like St Just, and so West Cornwall, beautiful coastal walks. But but what my mum did always say to me, which is the overarching feeling, is she always sort of embodied in me that I could do anything I wanted. So I was my brother and sister are like 20 years older than me, for the benefit of the listeners. So I was almost like a child at home, an only child at home. And my parents almost like learned from bringing up my brother and sister. And then when I came along, they did it quite differently. And I was allowed to do pretty much whatever I wanted to do. So I was very independent. I went out to work when I was 14 because that's what I wanted to do. And it was like friends were always welcome to come over. And it was the party house, wasn't it, where we met up before we went out drinking, or we'd be drinking up in my bedroom in the attic. And yeah, I think my mum just sort of bred into me that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And that's almost what has led into my parenting style, that I do that with the boys. They can do whatever they want to do, but also it still applies to me. There's a huge part of me which is just for me. So I don't want to use the word selfish, but I think I have been a little bit selfish with my time and doing things for me. I've also been very unselfish with, certainly feeling like I had to go out and earn a lot of money to pay for our lives and stuff. But yeah.
But I think that's the language, isn't it? And this is part of the problem. And there's no way. I mean, I know we probably need to draw to a close quite soon, and there's no way that we've even really scratched the surface of this subject, actually. But that is the issue. The language around women, and specifically around mothers, is if you define what you want to do, then you're being selfish. Whereas, and I mean, I talk to lots of mum friends, and we all find ourselves in quite a different situation, in that we're asking permission, so our other halves just go and do whatever it is that they're going to do, or the way that they parent is more passive. So if Dave's looking after the kids, they probably don't get out of their pajamas, they probably watch more TV than they would with me, they probably have less interaction, and funnily enough, they don't pester him for as much interaction because they know they're not going to get it. So it's really interesting. They're no less loved for it, but it's just a very different way of parenting. And similarly, he's currently standing as a local councillor in local elections, Green Party councillor, and he doesn't think twice about saying at sort of just after we've had tea, right, I'm going to go out and do a bit of campaigning, and then I might not see him until he'll lose track of time because he's having a lovely time campaigning, and he might not come back until after bath time, and I'm already starting to put them into bed and things, and that's not to say that he's thoughtless or careless. I don't think it's not meant with any kind of malice of intent. It is just his understanding is that, well, I have this life and there are these things I need to do in my life, and I just go and do them. And partly because I'm doing so many of the other things anyway, quite seamlessly,
Yeah.
effortlessly it might also look like. There's no real sense there that there's any problem with him doing that. He obviously tips back in and says, oh my god, I didn't see the time, I'm really sorry, but I would never not be conscious of the time. I would never not be conscious that really the kids need to have their tea now, or really they need to go to bed now. And so there's a sense of that mental load, I guess, that we carry as mothers as well, and that sense of, Lynn's coming to Bristol. Is it okay if I go and have a coffee on a Sunday morning? No. Why aren't I just saying Lynn's in Bristol next weekend? He's not, by the way, unfortunately. Lynn's in Bristol next weekend. We're going for a coffee. Like that, it shouldn't be a do you mind? But there's something cultural, I think, about our sense of, our primary responsibility is to be thinking about and caring for the kids, and everything else is something that we have to somehow get permission for.
Yeah, until you get divorced, then I don't have to get permission.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
Not until you get. I don't mean that. I mean until I got divorced. Gosh.
No. But I have jokingly said to conversations, I've jokingly said, look, if we were separated, you have to do a hell of a lot more. No, I'm joking. But I mean, a final point, because we started talking about work and the workplace, and you touched on something really important earlier, which is that some women's careers effectively stagnate, and some of that is by choice. And I just want to jump in and query that, because I think it's only by choice because we still live in a work culture that doesn't understand how it can use this resource when this resource comes back on different terms and with different restrictions, and that, I think, is a real loss. I mean, we know through all sorts of studies and research that the 9-to-5 day doesn't make any sense. We know that working 100 hours a week is actually detrimental. It's not really helpful. So this kind of machismo culture that says, I'm going to work into the night, I'm going to be sending emails at 10 o'clock at night, it's all kind of, it's nonsense and it's noise, and it's actually counterproductive.
Yeah.
But we don't know how to shift from that very kind of embedded way of working to a new way of working that would see us understand that it's not about being present for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and it's not about how many emails you send, it's actually what you produce. And my feeling as a self-employed person now, and I'm sure you must have this experience too, is that we're just so much more bloody productive. We're not filling the hours, however productive we thought we were being at the time, but we're not filling the hours in the way that we were previously. We know that every hour counts for what we actually really achieve, and I thought that's a real game changer. But it means we've lent out, we haven't lent in. We haven't gone back into the corporate world and changed it from the inside. We've left, and so many women do.
Yeah, because the corporate world just wasn't working. It absolutely wasn't working for me. That, I mean, I know that things are probably going to be different going forward with commuting into the office, but certainly for me, traveling an hour and a quarter to get into London to go to the office, to a pretty stressful job that was like 8 till 6 that I needed to be there, it just, and travel around the country, it just wasn't working. In the end, the stress of the not seeing my children enough and not being there for them, like really not enough, like my childminder was seeing so much more of my children than I was. I just couldn't hack it in the end, and the only sort of solution was to set up my own business, where the biggest benefit is choosing your hours, and absolutely you make those hours count. Like when I know those days when the children are at school, I know between 9 and 3, those are my working hours, and I have a certain amount of tasks to do in those hours, and then my time goes over to them. It suddenly changed things hugely as a parent. So I've been self-employed since 2015, and they've seen so much more of me than before. So it was the right decision for them and the right decision for me. So I suppose I've ended up in a perfect world, but don't get me wrong, it was a lot of hard work and a lot of years of earning bugger all money and
No, absolutely. And it's all the choices, and everybody makes the right choice for them. I think there is a kind of a brain drain equivalent, a gender drain that's happening, and of course the challenge within the corporate sector is that it just repeats because women aren't staying and redefining it from a sort of higher management point of view. I think I'd be really interested, I've heard more and more men say that fathers say this experience of lockdown and of working from home has changed their view on, they've suddenly realised they're seeing a lot more of their kids, and that they can get work done and spend more time with their families. And again, I think that could be a really interesting cultural shift. It's just whether it happens, it's whether we fall forward or we go back and behave as we did before, and that's a TBC, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to reflect back on it in maybe 3 years down the line. I think a year in the line, we'll still be dealing with all the COVID stuff, won't we?
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, cool. So great discussion.
Yes.
I don't think we've solved the world's problems there, but
no. Well, we want to get past episode 6 before we start solving anything. We're just going to set up all the problems, and then we'll move to the other side. We're wrapping up, so as we do, I just want to say that the podcast music was provided by Dan Greensmith, composed and produced by Dan Greensmith. The podcast itself is produced by Lynn Beattie and hosted, obviously, by us, Becky and Lynn.
And if you wanna get more information on us, then go to Ridley Wright's website or Mrs. Mummypenny, and find us on social media. Same handles. I'm Mrs. Mummypenny UK, but come follow us and see what pretty things we put on Instagram, etc.
And tell us what you think about the motherhood, life, work balance. Like, we really want to hear what you have to say. And any tips or tricks, any people out there that have, resolved the great housework dilemma, then God, please
get a cleaner. There you go. Best 25 quid I spend every 2 weeks. It's not even that much money. I love it. I'm not a natural cleaner. I love it.
No. Anyway, that's another subject. We'll come on to that at another point.
Yeah, what things to outsource. Cool. So thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you, or we'll speak to you in a week's time.
Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.